Do you hear the game just singing, singing the song of angry men? It is the music of the artists who like their pixels back again. Yeah, whatever. Hello all the crazy people out there. My name is Michael. I like wizards and dragons and making games. And this is a problem that has plagued many a developer who wants to try to make 3D games in GameMaker at some point or another. So GameMaker, on the whole, lends itself pretty well to making pixel art games. And a lot of people who try to make 3D games in GameMaker at some point or another try to apply pixel art to 3D. And I would probably say that most people who do this at some point or another run into the issue of the what you see on the screen right here. Transparent pixels in sprite art masking out things that are drawn behind them. And this is a bit of a problem. It's really annoying. It doesn't look very good. And as a general rule, it's something that you'd rather not have in your GameMaker game. Just for a bit of a, maybe a bit of perspective, this is approximately more or less what you would expect this model to look like. This is just 4 planes which have basically tree sprites mapped onto the planes. It's not quite billboarded. This problem does make itself known pretty often when people try to do billboarded sprites, but this is just 4 perpendicular planes with some pixel art on them standing straight up. So first, why exactly this happens, and if you don't see exactly what's happening right from the outset, if I do something like paint the transparent pixels in the sprite red and rerun the game, it should be pretty apparent why this effect is happening. So when you render something in 3D, you have something that is known as the depth buffer, and that will cause objects that are in front of other objects to block out things that are behind them that should be drawn later. And whenever you draw an object, in addition to writing its color information to the render target, to the application surface, to the screen, whatever, you also write its distance to the camera to the depth buffer. And the next object that the game tries to draw, for each pixel in the object that's rendered, it will compare its distance to the camera to whatever's in the depth buffer. And if it's farther away, then it's behind something, then it's occluded and it won't be drawn. And by default, alpha has nothing to do with that. So if you have a transparent pixel, its depth will be written to the depth buffer, even if it doesn't really appear on screen. And that is exactly what's happening here. You can see that when I fill the transparent regions of this tree with red. And when I remove it again, you can envision the outlines of the planes of each of these tree objects and where they would be, and you can see them blocking out whatever's behind them. And this is actually one of a couple different issues you can have with transparency in 3D. As a general rule, transparency in 3D sucks, and the less you just deal with it, the better the happier you'll be. If you're using pixel art like this tree, I guess thanks to Feather, I can just hover over an asset type and see a preview of it like this. If you are just rendering pixel art like this that has either 100% transparent pixels or 100% opaque pixels, and if you are using the default shader, fortunately this is an easy problem to solve. So I guess first, before I do anything major, the way that this demo program is working is this is a pretty simple demo room. I'm actually probably going to stick this in the 3D playlist close to the beginning because I don't actually know why I didn't make this video all the way at the beginning. Anyway, we're randomly generating 25 random X and Y coordinates in the room, sticking them in the object positions array, and then we just loop over that array and draw a tree at that position. So these lines of code here are pretty much everything that is being drawn, all the trees that are being drawn, all the interesting things that we'll be dealing with in this video. And if you have either 100% transparent or 100% opaque pixels, as I said, and if you're using the default GameMaker shader, so if you either never say shader set, or if you're drawing something after saying shader reset, then this is probably the easiest to deal with here. There are 2 functions, GPU set alpha test enable, and we would like to set this to true. This will enable alpha testing. Alpha testing is going to specifically tell the computer to, if you have a transparent pixel, to just ignore it, to discard it, as it were, and to not write its depth to the depth buffer so that it won't occlude things that are drawn behind it. And there's also, to go along with a GPU set alpha test ref val. And this is the reference value. This is the cutoff alpha value for transparent pixels. Anything that has a transparency that is lower than the alpha test reference value is going to be discarded. Anything that is going to have an alpha test reference value greater will not be. This will take an alpha between 0 and 255 rather than between 0 and 1, as you often see alpha represented. I'm just going to set this to something like 10 out of 255. Again, all the pixels in here are either 0% or 100%, so it doesn't really matter. Now when I run the game, we can see that we have our trees, and they're not occluding things with transparent pixels behind them, and they look pretty much as they should. Again, this is a problem that you often have when you're doing like pixel art like this in 3D. This is a problem that you often have when you're trying to billboard sprites in 3D. And if you're using the default shader, then those 2 lines of code are all you need. If you're not using the default shader, and if you're using one of your own shaders, and I'm just going to call this shd_test, and I'm going to get rid of these 2 lines up here. Actually, I'll comment them out. Shader set shd_test. When we're done, shader reset. And this is just a default pass-through shader. This doesn't do anything fancy. It doesn't contain anything like 3D lighting code or 3D anything like that, 3D animation code or anything like that. And when I run the game again, we're going to have the same problem we had before. And we're going to find that, once again, transparent pixels are blocking out things that are drawn afterwards that are drawn behind them. It's a little annoying. And we're also going to find that if we uncomment these 2 lines of code, then it's not going to make a difference, unfortunately, and we're going to have to go back to the drawing board to figure out what we want to do about this ourselves. All right. Fortunately, this is also just a couple lines of code fix. So you can do your statements and shaders. This is going to make some people uncomfortable, but you can say if gl_frag color.a is less than, and in the shader, the alpha of a pixel will be between 0 and 1, so it won't be between 0 and 255. We can say if gl_frag color.a is less than, for example, 10%, 0.1. We can use the fancy discard keyword. And this is going to be basically what the alpha test ref and alpha test enable functions in GameMaker would do on their own with a default shader. This is going to discard pixels that have an alpha less than a certain amount so that they won't be written to the depth buffer. And this is going to solve our problem of pixel art in GameMaker. A lot of developers, particularly GameMaker developers, have a bit of a stigma against if statements and shaders. You are allowed to use if statements and shaders. And contrary to popular belief, if statements and shaders are not the worst thing for performance ever, although in particular the discard keyword, discarding pixels selectively, is not the fastest operation because of the way that GPUs like to run the same machine code on multiple pixels at once. But if you're trying to prevent transparent pixels from being written to the depth buffer like this, then you kind of don't really have any other option, at least not within the shader. And I will not be commenting further on the matter. So if you don't want to have this 0.1 hard-coded into your shader, you can make it like a preprocessor macro. You can make it something like a uniform constant, and you can pass the uniform into the shader with one of the uniform functions from GML. And theoretically, and GameMaker alleges that this works, but I've never seen any evidence that it actually does. Theoretically, it's possible to access the alpha test enable and alpha test ref values. These are, to the GameMaker default shader, these are just uniforms that are passed to the default shader as uniform constants. And if you type gl_, what is it, alpha test, oh, what's it called? Oh, it's GM alpha test enabled, not GL. If you type GM_alpha test enabled, it will highlight as green, like some of the other fancy keywords. GM base texture is another one of the GameMaker built-in uniforms. Anything that begins with GM_ and is highlighted in green. There's also GM alpha test ref value. Alpha test ref value? Come on. Oh, it's alpha ref value. GM alpha ref value is another one, is another keyword highlighted in green, another built-in GameMaker uniform. And the GameMaker manual says it's possible to say if GM_alpha test enabled, if GL frag color alpha is less than this reference value, then discard. Anyway, GameMaker alleges that this should work. I've never seen any evidence that it does. You will, if you wanted to do alpha testing in a shader, you will have to spin your own code to do this, pass in your own uniforms or something like that. I'm going to go back to what we had before. Now, this will work for pixel art that has either, as this tree does, 100% transparent or 100% opaque pixels. This will not work quite as well for objects that have semi-transparent pixels in them. So this here is some sort of like glass cube. I don't know what you would want this to be, like the, maybe it can be the fancy Tesseract object from the Avengers or whatever. Anyway, this is going to be a cube with faces that are about 50% transparent. And you can sort of see through it, you can sort of, like not, you can see the tint applied to whatever's behind it. And if I were to, instead of drawing the tree, if I were to draw the glass block vertex buffer as I have loaded it into the game, we're going to have something like this. And we're going to see that there is transparency. We do have alpha blending, but we're also going to see that the way that the cubes intersect is almost as like awkward and unpleasant as the way that the transparent planes of the trees intersected in the first demo. And this is where it gets a little bit harder. So we don't have any fully transparent objects. We don't want anything to be discarded. When we draw this, we could we could set the GameMaker alpha test ref value to like, I don't know, 180 out of 255, or we could set the threshold in shader underscore test to like 0.75 or whatever. And this will indeed cause the planes in the glass cubes to not be drawn, but this really isn't what we want. In this case, we don't want the fragments to be discarded. We want them to be alpha blended, but we don't want them to be discarded, and we don't want them to be drawn over the stuff behind them. And this is where transparency in 3D really starts to become really, like, not a lot of fun at all very quickly. So, conventionally, the way that you would do this is that you would, one, draw everything in your scene that isn't transparent first. So you would draw all the fully opaque objects first. That could be the floor, that could be the tree models if they're fully opaque and not transparent. That could be like buildings and stuff like that, NPCs, monsters, what have you. And then at the end, you would draw transparent objects like this, or objects with semi-transparency, and you would draw them over everything else. So you can see that if I were to go back into the game, while the glass cubes are sort of writing over each other, right? There should be an object behind this block, but it looks like there isn't. All of them are going to, that one just literally popped in as I walked through this. All of them are going to draw through the floor correctly. None of them are going to block the floor because the floor is drawn first. If I were to do this, if I were to first draw the trees in the world, with or without the transparency, you would see that none of the glass cubes are blocking the trees, although the trees are behaving like on their own. They're drawing through the sides, but that's a modeling problem. That's not a code problem. And that is because this exactly the same as we had before, the depth buffer. The trees have already been written to the depth buffer at the time of the cubes being drawn. The floor has already been written to the depth buffer, the skybox and everything. So I'm going to get rid of these trees because I think they're kind of cluttering up the screen. The simplest solution would be to manually sort the objects in order of from farthest away from the camera to closest to the camera. And in regular 2D drawing, that's just what happens by default, right? The depth property of instances determines the order in which they're drawn. Objects with a higher depth are drawn first, objects with a lower depth are drawn later. And that is why in 2D GameMaker, you just don't have to worry about these alpha problems, because everything is automatically drawn in the correct order from back to front. And in 3D, it's not really that simple. I guess if you have a fixed camera perspective in 3D, it can be that simple, but if you have a first-person camera or if you have a moving third-person camera in 3D, it's not that simple. And you might want to manually sort the objects in the order that you draw them. Since object positions here is just an array, we can say array sort. And the array sort function can take a sorting function which will sort objects based on some criteria. And Boy, I don't want to spend too much time going over exactly how the array sort function works in this video, because I want this to be about alpha and not about array sorting functions, but given two elements A and B that are compared, two elements of the array that are being compared against each other, we can write a sorting function that returns a value based on which is greater and which is less, which should be sorted to be first and which should be sorted to be second. And since A and B are going to be structs in the object positions array containing an x and a y, we could say var distance A is going to be point distance from. In this demo, the player object is what the camera's from position is determined by. So we can say the player's x, player's y.
Hey.
And then the x and the y of element A. And GameMaker. It's been many years and I still haven't figured out what keyboard shortcut does that, and it's really annoying. And we can do the same thing for point B. We can do the same thing for element B, and we can return dist B minus dist A, and this will return a negative value if distance A is greater than distance B, a positive value if distance A is less than distance B, and that will cause the elements in object positions to be sorted from farthest away to closest. So if I were to run the game now, you could see that this is going to solve the problem with a bit of an asterisk on it. And you may have seen a flicker right there. If you're standing still, this looks okay, this looks correct for the most part. Objects that are farther away from the camera will be drawn first. Objects that are nearer to the camera will be drawn later because they will be sorted to the bottom of the array based on distance from the camera. And if you're standing still, this mostly looks fine. If you start to move around, you will be able to start noticing the semi-transparent surfaces, the semi-transparent objects sorting themselves in real time in front of you. And if you move back and forth between two different positions, you may start to notice things popping into and out of each other, and that's really not desirable in the slightest. It arguably looks just as bad like that as it did when objects were just massing each other in the first place. And this is one of the hard limitations of the system, and at this point, I would say that my preferred solution to dealing with alpha in 3D is just don't. If you can avoid it, don't draw things that are semi-transparent like this. Discarding transparent pixels like for pixel art, like with the trees at the beginning of the video, that's fine, mostly. If you have millions of trees in your world, then you might start to notice the performance hit of doing that. But if you have millions of trees in your world, you're going to have other problems to deal with anyway. If you have semi-transparent objects in the world like this, one, try to minimize the number of these that you have. Try to not have them so close to each other that they're going to clip through each other anyway. And if you absolutely have to draw anything with semi-transparency in 3D like this, for example, if you want the windows of a house to have a frosted, semi-transparent look to them, draw the house first and draw the windows afterwards. So draw the house first, draw the things outside the house first, and then have the semi-transparent windows be their own separate vertex buffers and draw them last. This is a problem where the best solution to the problem is, in almost all cases, just avoid having the problem in the first place. Even in a lot of high production value AAA games, transparency is a pain in the neck. If you look closely at a lot of AAA games from the last decade, or especially before that, you will notice that they just avoid having transparency wherever possible. Windows in a building may be white and frosted looking, but they may be completely opaque, and you may not be able to actually see through them if they have glass in them at all. If you have something like liquid in a game, that is often either a flat sheet or a very simplistic mesh that won't intersect many objects like this, and you can get away with just drawing that mesh after everything else. You can just get away with drawing the water after everything else. If you want a vocabulary word to Google, there is something called depth peeling, which is essentially tracking multiple depth buffers at the same time. And as I'm sure many of you are aware, in 2019, ray tracing became the new hotness, which, among all the other things that it lets developers do, it makes transparency like this a lot easier. But unless you are either insane or /and this guy, you will not be writing a ray tracer in GameMaker. And when it comes to transparency in 3D in GameMaker, I would strongly recommend working within the limitations instead of trying to fight against them. There are times when trying to push GameMaker beyond its limits can be fun, but I would not consider this to be one of those times. So, I'm going to stop. If you want the code for this, there's not much of it, but you can look for the GitHub repository down in the video description. I think I just opened something that wasn't GitHub. I have a Patreon, so if you want to contribute to the channel, links to that can be found in all the usual places. Otherwise, I try to post about 2 game dev videos a week, one tutorial like this, and one Let's Make a Game, currently Bullet Hell. So if any of that appeals to you, feel free to subscribe. I hope you all found that useful, and I certainly hope that this ends up being a video that people find before they have problems with Alpha in 3D, and I will see you all later. Special thanks to Army Armbuster, DJ Gibbles, Edward Holt, GameMaker, Gunnar Clovis, KeyXE, Syndra Larson, Squarecrow, and Zenjamin for supporting these videos. If you want to support this channel yourself, head on over to the Patreon page down in the video description to join the fun.